Welcome to the WorkLife Wellbeing podcast. Digital financial advisor Open Money launched their low-cost employee benefit solution, WorkLife, to help employers put their employees first by enabling them to offer financial advice, tools, and support through the workplace. Not stopping there, WorkLife by Open Money expanded their offering to include a broad range of benefits to support their employees' overall well-being that might usually be out of reach for many businesses. My name's Leah Heath, and I'm your host for this podcast. Over this 6-part series, I am going to be joined by special guests to discuss all areas of well-being. Today, we're discussing financial well-being. Hello, and welcome to the second podcast of this series. My name is Leah Heath, and I'm your host of the WorkLife Wellbeing podcast. You will be delighted to know that I have stuck to my word, and I have got lots of fabulous guests to join us for the rest of the series to discuss each of the 5 pillars of well-being, so you don't just have to listen to my voice. Our guest today is here to discuss financial well-being and the importance of accessible information in empowering people to make their own financial decisions, how this has previously hindered people, and how it is changing in the present. So today we have a good friend of WorkLife by Open Money and co-editor of Mouthy Money, Edmund Greaves. Hello, Ed. How are you?
Hey, Leah. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. So if you're listening and you're particularly interested in finances, you might have heard of Ed before, as he spends a lot of time on TV and radio, poking his nose into different economic issues. So welcome, Ed. If you'd like to kick off, please do tell us a little bit about yourself, Mouthy Money, and what led you to become interested in financial well-being.
Yeah, so a bit about me first, I guess. I've been a journalist, for nearly a decade now, which is quite exciting. I'm feeling old already saying that. I've been a financial journalist actually for about 5 years now. So I used to work at a financial magazine called, a personal finance magazine, I should say, called MoneyWise, and I've been helping to run Mouthy Money now for about a year and a half. It fell into personal finance really, but it kind of wasn't the first thing that I had in mind. I actually turned up in London in 2016, essentially just looking for a job and fell into it, but actually really enjoy it. And I think the issues and the the stuff that goes on in the world of personal finance is actually really important to people's everyday lives. So yeah, it's really stuck with it and become an expert, I guess, is what I'd say.
That's what I described you as, so I'd take it if I were you.
Yeah.
So I've read a bit of Mouthy Money in the past, and something you guys are really hot on is the importance of it being jargon-free. Why do you think jargon-free financial information is so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to explain a bit about Mouthy Money first, I mean, what we're kind of trying to do that's a little bit different from kind of your everyday personal finance section in the paper or kind of normal online kind of place, journalism based websites and that kind of thing, is we're really trying to tell more stories through kind of the lens of normal people's stories rather than saying, this big bank has done this and this is why we think that you should pay attention to it. It's more about saying, Joe Blogs has had this experience with the bank and this is why it matters kind of thing, and trying to have that kind of human element and basis to the way that we discuss the themes and issues on the website. So, I mean, how does that kind of feed into the importance of jargon-free information? I think jargon is really a tool used by, I mean, this is not even necessarily an issue just for financial services. It's a broader thing. Jargon is used by, be it government organizations, financial firms, any kind of company really, to essentially raise the information, the barrier to understanding information, so that people don't feel like they're able to access that information properly and have to rely on others to manage it for them. But I think essentially that's unfair. I think people should be given clear, concise information that they can understand. And I think, being able to figure things out without having to get somebody else to do it for you is really important. it's about independence. We're supposed to be independent, autonomous, people able to manage our lives properly, and it all feeds into that ultimately.
So, in terms of it being important, what you're saying is it's about having our own autonomy to be able to make our own decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, if that's believed to be so important, why do you think the language around finances has traditionally been so exclusive?
Yeah, I mean, talking about finance specifically, I think the issue is, firstly, it's an issue of the way the regulation has changed over the years. So once upon a time, there was a lot less protection for consumers, and financial firms could essentially, do what they like. There's also it's a cultural thing as well. You've kind of looked back on the way that old school insurance firms and financial advice firms and investment firms used to do business, and it was all about saying to a customer, you don't know anything about this system, so pay us a fee and we'll do it for you. And that's kind of setting that information barrier, to the point where a normal person in the street can't think, okay, I can manage this for myself. They're going to have to pay somebody else to do it for them. And that is why there's always been that kind of jargon line, should we call it,
Mhm.
in that creation of exclusivity. It's about forcing you to pay for services that you don't necessarily need, basically.
And I can see what you're saying with it's not just a financial problem, because if you look at things like legalese, if you ever wanted to, I don't know, sue somebody or go through a divorce, you have to pay a solicitor. You have to pay those fees because there's not a chance a regular Joe Bloggs would understand that. So I do think the exclusivity, of this language can have a bit of an effect on people's well-being, because you don't feel as though you are either doing enough to understand it, or I guess it can make people feel a bit dumb, for lack of a better word. How do you
Yeah.
think inclusivity has affected people and their well-being, particularly within the financial space?
Yeah, I think there are important distinctions here, and I think your kind of legalese example is a good one. I think in some circumstances, it's actually the right thing to do to pay somebody to take care of it for you, particularly if you have kind of a complex pension or inheritance planning needs, or kind of a complex insurance needs. Those kind of situations, it definitely you need the help of others who are experts in their field who can help do it for you. I think in a lot of other areas, really, it should be people should be able to kind of to look after their affairs autonomously. I think the way this kind of exclusivity and kind of barrier to entry has affected people, it's probably in two different ways. The first is the more obvious, that people have to pay more for their financial products. So, be that an expensive advice service that charges you, 2% fees or whatever it might be, or an investment service that overcharges you for something you could be doing yourself, or even kind of, brokers who charge you a fee for taking out a product that you could have just found for yourself on a price comparison website or something like that. That hits people's bottom lines. And in the long term, if you use the example of financial advice, it means that, you might be saving money and investing over time, but ultimately the amount of money that you're left with at retirement, or, whatever your horizon is going to be less than it would have been were you paying smaller fees. Now, when you talk about the difference between a 2% annual fee and a 0.5% annual fee, or whatever it might be, that doesn't necessarily seem like a lot, especially if you write that in absolute terms on a piece of paper. But when you add that together over a 30-year time frame, it ends up being a lot of money. And, it ends up being a lot of, because even then, that money that goes to fees, instead of going into your account that then gets invested, you're losing out on all the growth of that extra cash. Now, there's another side to it as well, and I think this is perhaps the more dangerous and possibly less talked about side of it. It's the kind of exclusivity of some, financial services leaves people actually opting out of them completely. So, for example, something like a life insurance policy. Life insurance is not the easiest thing to understand. It can, in many cases require a level of advice to get the right product for your kind of, family and life situation. What happens when you make things difficult to understand and highly complex is people just tune out and they maybe don't get their life insurance policy. And then maybe something happens to them 5 years later and they don't have that policy to protect their family. And that leads to much more devastating outcomes for people because you've created a barrier to entry for those people that is so high that they simply think, not going to do it. And it could be the life insurance thing. It could even be investing. Something as basic as putting money in investments for 30 years and ending up with an ISA which is all set for your retirement is great. But if you take one look at a service like that and think, oh, it doesn't make sense to me, I don't want to do it, and instead you put your money in a savings account that's earning 0.5%, it's going to cost you thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds at the end of the day, and you don't see it because like the charges, it happens over 30 years, but it happens, and people end up living in poverty in retirement as a result. I mean, I don't try not to be too kind of catastrophize too much about it, but it can be really bad. You know and ultimately I think where well-being comes into it, you know it's tough to say, and people who have money, often don't have good well-being either. But if you don't have money and if you retire without what you need and that kind of thing, it's can be devastating for people's entire lives. So providing access to affordable and understandable products is just so important, so important.
Yeah, and I mean, I was just looking at my notes here because I attended a course last night and I was actually really shocked. Even though I work in financial services, I was shocked to find out that the FCA found out that in 2018 to 2019, the average pension pot in the UK was 61k 897. And, to some people that might sound like a lot of money. But if you're spreading that over, say, 30, 40 years in retirement as we're living longer, that actually is quite a dangerous number of people hitting poverty in later life. But what people don't understand, and what there's not really been a huge amount of effort to tackle in workplaces, is the importance of compound interest over time. And the earlier you get involved in sorting out something for your pension, the better it's going to be for you now, and for you further down the line. So, as you're saying, I mean, we've had plenty of pension schemes, and it's fairly new, the opt-in scheme within the UK. But just because they're opted in and putting in the minimum doesn't mean that they're going to have a good amount in retirement. And the education piece around this hasn't been great, I would argue, anyway.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's a real knob issue with pensions. I mean, it's something that I've talked about so often. I don't know if it's still the case because I haven't done it in a while. But if you Google what is a pension, normally you get back some answer which says like, a pension is a fixed sum of money that is paid to you every month in retirement, or something to that effect. And we have this
Mm-hmm.
kind of mindset that even years into auto enrollment, like you said, where people think that a pension is either one or two things. It's the state pension, which the state pension is, I mean, is all smoke and mirrors. There's no national
Yeah.
fund there which people are going to draw down from. It's a pay-as-you-go system. The other side of it is kind of these old school final salary schemes that you would be really lucky to be a member of these days. There are a few companies out there that still have them. Most of them are closed to new participants.
Mm-hmm.
Some government departments and things still do them, but that idea that you're going to retire one day and then every month you'll have a fixed amount of money deposited into your account, it just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And the issue that we have is that we've had auto enrollment, which has been fantastic, and it means that people are saving into their pensions. But the issue is, A, they're not saving enough, B, they're not making choices within that, and C, the system is not geared towards letting them make choices. So sure, when you become an employee, you now get auto enrolled into a pension, assuming you're earning enough to do that. But then you're not given any choice about the provider that you use, who gives you, the advice on what to pick and that kind of
Mhm.
thing. You're at the mercy of whoever in your HR department has decided we're going to pick XYZ pension scheme. And it may not be a very good pension scheme. We've seen plenty of kind of big pension funds that have not performed well, and they've not, done good things for customers. And that's terrible because people aren't given the choice. Um, yeah, it's sorry, I get absolutely hot. Like one thing I get hot under collar about is pensions, because it just the system as it was introduced was a good start, but we were only
Yeah.
halfway there, in my view.
No, I agree as well. As I bet people think I am so boring at parties because I just go on about it. I do think it's so interesting, and it is one of, I would say, especially in younger people, one of the biggest knowledge gaps we've got in terms of finances. We've got people talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but actually, you've got something at your convenience that you can just put away into, and there's big tax benefits, and people don't know about it. So I think having things like jargon-free information, and information that's affordable and accessible, is really, really important where these huge knowledge gaps are. But based on that, do you think you've seen a change in the use of jargon-free language regarding finances? How do you think this will affect people going into the future?
Yeah, I mean, I've only been in the kind of, reporting news and looking at the industry for about 5 years, and I think people who've been in the industry for 30 years will tell you that change takes a long time.
Mhm.
I think you do see differences now, and I think companies are trying to be better at it, but I almost feel like in some circumstances things sometimes go too far the other way, so you'll end up with companies that talk to people like they're babies, not like they're informed decision-making adults. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if it's too
Yeah.
much of an oversimplification, but I think sometimes you have the issue where it's the issue we discussed before, where the information is presented so as to be inaccessible, and then you have the other way where the information is presented in such uh, a banal way as people just think, this is just meaningless. It doesn't help, and there is an issue there with kind of the way the regulator functions around the provision of information and being able to tell people, the right kind of thing about their finances. There are
Mhm.
restrictions, especially for advisors on the way they can speak to people, about money and the things they can and can't say, and that provides, that is a problem kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum. For me, the way that, proper good jargon-free language should be is explain to somebody, well, this is your situation, these are your options, this is how it works, and this is how much it will cost you. And just being clear about that and honest, I think, is the most important thing, and that honesty. Um, I think industry has a long way to go. I think everybody has a long way to go. The issue is, I mean, there's a lot of arguments about whether financial education actually works or not, but I think even just at school, the explanation of basic, things like what is a mortgage and how does it work? You don't have to tell people how banks arbitrage mortgages to earn money and blah blah blah. Just, like, this is the process of how you buy a house, or these are the positives and negatives of having a credit card. Just straightforward stuff
Yeah.
that gives people information and lets them make decisions. I think, like I say, I think progress has been made, but I think there is still a really long way to go.
Yeah, I completely agree. And while you're talking about schools, and schools would be the ideal sort of place to put this information and education in, how do you feel about the workplace getting involved in this? Because it's a tricky one, I think, with finances. So I mentioned this actual quote in my last podcast, but your boss indeed said to me once, if I'm big enough and ugly enough to give people a salary, I should be able to give them a financial wellbeing tool. Some people have that idea, whereas before, when I've spoke to people in organisations, often they go, "Oh, it's not my job to get involved in their finances." But what I think is, okay, maybe it's not your job to get involved in their finances, but can you give them the tools to help themselves? Because that's what it's all about. It's about empowering people to do things themselves. Empowering is a hideous word that I've used so many times in that sense. But what do you think regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, like I said before, there's a lot of arguments about whether financial education actually works. People who say that it doesn't say that it doesn't because when you give people too much information, like I said before, they become overloaded and then they
Mhm.
disengage. And then there's also the other issue where people become overconfident and think that they're better at doing something than they might be and end up actually in a worse position. That kind of thing can happen when people think that they can, going investing in companies that, are rocketing in value one day and collapsing in value the next. Mistakes can be made when people are too sure of themselves. I think what you've hit on the head there, though, is that actually ultimately people, as much as you can educate them and help them, need to make their own decisions. And what's the most important thing in helping people make their own decisions is providing them with all the information they need to make an informed decision. So it's not forcing somebody into something that they necessarily don't think is a good idea and they're are being overcharged for, or not finding good value for money, or not enjoying the service. Give people the information they need to make a choice that suits them. There are hundreds of financial firms out there to choose from all sorts of different things. Unfortunately, with workplace pensions, there isn't much of a market. But with insurance products, credit cards, banks, mortgages, pretty much everything else, ISAs, whatever you like, the choices at people's fingertips. All they need is a little bit of information to help them weigh up those options and make a decision. I think from the perspective of should a workplace be doing that, I think absolutely. Ultimately, when you're an employee of a company, you spend most of your life doing things on behalf of that company and getting paid for it. And I think it's in the interest of companies who want a healthy and happy workforce to also have a workforce that's able to not overspend its paycheck every month and look after its long-term financial well-being and make sure that people are happy with the money that they're earning and the way that they're spending it on the other side. So yeah, I think calling it a responsibility, I think perhaps for me a little strong. I think any business owner's interest should be in having people who are happy and feel
Mhm.
financially stable, because if you're not financially stable, you're either looking for a job that pays better, or you're too worried about your finances to be able to do your job properly in the first place.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. And I guess it's ultimately this choice that does help people, because if you are thinking about people's mental well-being, for example, and you're saying you've got to get to this yoga session, it's amazing, yoga will sort your life out, and someone's thinking yoga will absolutely not sort my life out, what I need is CBT or something like that. It's having that plethora of choice to be able to say, well, this works for me, I'm going to do this, in the same sense that if you were going to say to somebody, oh, get yourself a LISA, I've got one, it's brilliant, but they're not thinking of buying a house or retiring with it. So again, it is just that freedom of choice and that knowledge and information that would help them have that freedom, which ultimately helps them with their financial well-being and overall well-being as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think the best resources out there to help people better understand their finances are?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few there, and again, I think a lot of this comes back down to choice. But I mean, for me, core kind of information services that I would tell anybody to go to and use would be probably the first one would be the money advice service. It's really good. It's essentially run by the government, so you're never going to get any ulterior motives there. You're always just going to get plainly presented information. They've got loads of really good tools and resources and calculators and all sorts of things you could do, and none of it is kind of it's all very plainly spoken. There's no kind of overtones of anything there. There's no judgment if you're in debt or whatever issue you might be having. It's a really good place to start. The other place actually is probably just the gov.uk website. you go on there and find out any allowance you might ever need, from ISAs to pensions to, what taxes you might pay and what benefits you might be able to get. The information is all there. Unfortunately, the Gov website can be a little bit inaccessible sometimes and a bit of a pain to use, but it's still, I'd say, a really important resource, especially for anybody who really wants to take control of their money and have kind of that information at their fingertips. In terms of kind of non-governmental stuff, I would always say to somebody, use whatever media outlet or website that you're comfortable with and you think speaks to you in the right tone. I mean, you can use the website Money Saving Expert, which is amazing, and it has so many money saving deals and information about kind of where to get the cheapest this, that, and the other mobile deal or broadband or credit cards and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really good. But somebody might not be interested in that. They might want to look at kind of information about investing, and MSE isn't so good at information about investing. They don't really focus on it that much. So for that kind of person, maybe use like a broadsheet newspaper like the Times is really good, or the Telegraph. They've got really good money section. Even, the Financial Times, which is a bit kind of business focused maybe, but still I think tackles personal finance stuff in really interesting and accessible ways. I think it's you got to kind of pick what you're happiest with. I think the thing to really avoid, and the kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, is avoiding kind of weird websites that don't have kind of obvious organization and provenance behind them, and are giving off kind of red flags. Red flags for me are kind of like seeing an article that says kind of like, if you buy this one stock, you will definitely make loads of money from it, and that kind of thing. Anything that promises you things like that, they're probably either doing it for a reason or it's just bad information. So those are the ones to avoid. But yeah, I think the media in the UK, especially around personal finance, is actually really good. So yeah, you got to kind of shop around and read and make your own decision on it. Obviously, and I have to say it because it's mine. My organisation is Mouthy Money as well. It's a really good place to come for kind of if you're looking for kind of real life examples of the way that people manage their money. I'd say ours is a good place to pitch up to too.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that we're going to go and check out those resources and Mouthy Money, see what we can learn and how we can help ourselves make better informed decisions regarding our finances in the future. You also take questions on Mouthy Money as sort of inspiration for your content, don't you?
We do indeed, yeah. So at the moment, I can't remember off the top of my head where you need to go exactly, but I would say the best way to get in touch if you have a question for one of our panel of financial experts is to email editors@mouthymoney.co.uk, and we'll get back to you and see if we can help with any kind of financial question you have.
Well, that's brilliant, because my next question and my last question was going to be, how do we get in contact with you?
Same email. And obviously, if you want to visit us, it's mouthymoney.co.uk, and we're on social media as well. So just look us up, basically.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to the listeners. If you're still listening, I'll speak next week with you all. Thank you very much. So thanks very much for listening, guys. I think we can all agree that based on what Ed has said today, jargon is a social problem which creates a lack of autonomy. And the two main ways that exclusive languages affect people's autonomy and finances is that they have to pay